In 1974, the Hollywood industry was riding high on the success of blockbusters like The Godfather Part 2 and Chinatown. But behind the glamorous premieres and red carpets lurked a darker reality. Major studios were hemorrhaging millions on ambitious projects that spectacularly crashed and burned at ticket windows across America. From Western dramas nobody wanted to see, to musical adaptations that left audiences baffled, to bizarre sci-fi experiments that defied explanation, this year produced some of cinema's most catastrophic financial meltdowns. The executives who greenlit these projects watched in horror as their carefully calculated bets turned into career-ending nightmares. Let's dive straight into it and talk about the 13 biggest box office disasters from 1974 that made Hollywood executives choke on their cigars, starting our countdown with a film so obscure that even classic cinema enthusiasts struggle to remember it. Zandy's Bride brought together Oscar winner Gene Hackman, fresh off his French Connection triumph, and international star Liv Ullmann in what should have been a prestige Western drama. Swedish director Jan Troell had just scored with his epic immigrant saga, The Emigrants, earning multiple Academy Award nominations and establishing himself as a critical darling. Warner Brothers gave him the resources to craft an authentic American film shot against the stunning Big Sur coastline. The story followed a rough cattle rancher who orders a mail-order bride from Minnesota, expecting a servant rather than a partner. What Troell delivered was an unflinching portrait of frontier brutality and misogyny, with Hackman's character treating Ullmann's Hannah like purchased property. The director's uncompromising realism showed the harsh truth of 19th century pioneer life without romanticizing anything. Audiences stayed away in droves. The pacing crawled at a glacial speed even by early 70s standards, and the relentlessly grim tone offered zero entertainment value for ticket buyers seeking escape. Critics praised the performances but couldn't recommend sitting through such a depressing slog. The film disappeared from theaters within weeks, leaving virtually no cultural footprint. Today, Zandy's Bride exists as a forgotten curiosity that never received a proper DVD release for decades. Warner Brothers quietly buried this expensive misfire and moved on. Jon Voight was riding high after Deliverance made him a major star, so 20th Century Fox figured his next project was a sure thing. They adapted Pat Conroy's beloved memoir, The Water is Wide, which told the inspiring true story of an idealistic teacher working with impoverished black students on a South Carolina sea island in 1969. Director Martin Ritt brought his social conscience sensibilities to the material, and Voight delivered a heartfelt performance as the title character who fights against systemic neglect and institutional racism. Everything looked perfect on paper. The source material had won awards, the subject matter felt relevant and important, and the production quality met professional standards. Yet, audiences simply didn't show up when Conrack hit theaters. The film's earnest message and educational themes couldn't compete with flashier entertainment options. Marketing struggled to position this quiet character study in a marketplace dominated by disaster spectacles and crime thrillers. Critics who bothered reviewing it generally wrote positive notices, but that translated into exactly zero momentum at the box office. The film earned back only a fraction of its production budget before vanishing from public consciousness. Today, Conrack remains known primarily among dedicated cinephiles who appreciate its noble intentions, while general audiences have never heard of it. Fox's gamble on prestige drama resulted in an expensive lesson about what mainstream viewers actually wanted to see. When Paramount Pictures decided to adapt Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's cherished philosophical fable into a lavish musical, they assembled an impressive creative team. Stanley Donen directed, fresh from his success with Singin' in the Rain and Charade. Legendary songwriting duo Lerner and Lowe crafted the score. The cast included Richard Kiley, Bob Fosse, and Gene Wilder in supporting roles. Everything about this production screamed prestige family entertainment. The source material had enchanted readers worldwide for decades with its poetic exploration of love, loss, and what truly matters in life. Paramount envisioned a roadshow attraction that would play for months in major cities, selling out performances and generating massive profits. Instead, they created a strange, slow-moving spectacle that baffled children and adults alike. The musical numbers felt disconnected from the story's contemplative nature, and the philosophical underpinnings translated poorly to song and dance. Kids found it boring and confusing. Adults who loved the book felt betrayed by the adaptation's choices. The film opened to disastrous reviews and even worse audience word of mouth. Paramount pulled it from wide release quickly, cutting their losses before the hemorrhaging got worse. While the source material continues enduring as a literary classic, this musical version became a cautionary tale about misunderstanding your source material. The studio lost millions on a project that seemed foolproof on paper. Now we enter truly bizarre territory. Flash Gordon started as a low-budget adult parody of the classic Flash Gordon serials, mixing science fiction adventure with explicit content that pushed every boundary. The filmmakers thought they'd found a clever niche combining camp nostalgia with adult entertainment, creating something that would play in both mainstream theaters and adult venues. Reality proved far more complicated. Distribution became a nightmare as theaters refused to book it, fearing legal troubles and community backlash. The content was too explicit for regular cinemas, but too silly and effects-heavy for adult theaters that wanted straightforward material. Censors in different regions demanded different cuts, creating a distribution headache that made consistent release impossible. The film got trapped in legal battles and rating disputes that drained whatever small budget existed. Even within the exploitation film circuit, Flash Gordon struggled to find its audience. The special effects work was actually quite ambitious for such a low-budget production, with stop-motion animation and elaborate sets, but nobody knew how to market this strange hybrid. Years later, it developed a small cult following among fans of obscure exploitation cinema, but in 1974, it represented a complete commercial disaster. The producers learned that attempting to serve two completely different audiences simultaneously was a recipe for reaching neither. Long before Halloween made him a household name, John Carpenter was a film student at USC who turned his thesis project into a feature film. Dark Star followed the misadventures of a space crew on a mission to destroy unstable planets, blending science fiction with deadpan comedy and philosophical absurdism. The entire production budget barely exceeded $60,000, stretched across years of post-production work where Carpenter and his collaborators, Dan O'Bannon, learned filmmaking through trial and error. The result was unlike anything audiences had seen before, a slow-burn comedy about boredom and existential dread in space that predated Alien's horror by years. O'Bannon would later recycle concepts from Dark Star when writing Alien's screenplay, particularly the creature design elements. But in 1974, nobody knew what to make of this weird little movie. Distributors couldn't figure out how to position it. Was it comedy? Science fiction? Art film? The marketing confusion doomed any chance of mainstream success. Dark Star played a few college campuses and repertory theaters before disappearing completely. Only years later did science fiction fans rediscover it as a cult oddity that influenced countless future filmmakers. Today, film scholars recognize its importance in Carpenter's development and its prescient take on space travel's psychological toll. But at release, this peculiar experiment found almost no audience and earned virtually nothing. Carpenter would have to wait several more years before finally breaking through with Halloween's massive success. Sidney Pollack was Hollywood royalty after They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And Jeremiah Johnson established his directing credibility. When he decided to make a crime thriller exploring Japanese organized crime through Western eyes, Warner Brothers backed him with a substantial budget. Robert Mitchum signed on to star, lending his iconic presence to the project. Paul Schrader and Robert Towne worked on the screenplay, two of the era's hottest writers. Every element suggested a major hit. The film dove deep into Japanese criminal culture, exploring codes of honor and loyalty that felt foreign to American audiences. Mitchum played a former soldier who returns to Japan to rescue a friend's daughter from organized criminals, navigating a world where he doesn't understand the rules. Pollack crafted an atmospheric, deliberately paced thriller that demanded patience and cultural curiosity from viewers. Unfortunately, mainstream audiences in 1974 had little interest in Japanese settings or cultural nuance. The film's violence felt restrained compared to flashier American crime films, and the complex honor codes confused viewers expecting straightforward action. Critics appreciated the ambitious cross-cultural storytelling, but their praise didn't translate into ticket sales. The Yakuza became a financial disappointment that's now primarily remembered by film noir enthusiasts and Pollack completists. Warner Brothers learned that international settings and cultural specificity could alienate rather than intrigue American moviegoers. Brian De Palma had just completed Sisters when he unleashed this rock musical horror mashup on unsuspecting audiences. Phantom of the Paradise combined elements from Phantom of the Opera, Faust, and The Picture of Dorian Gray into a glam rock fever dream about a composer whose music gets stolen by a demonic record producer. Paul Williams wrote the songs and starred as the villainous Swan, while William Finley played the disfigured Phantom haunting a New Rock palace. The film defied every conventional category. Was it horror, musical, comedy, satire? De Palma refused to pick just one lane, creating something wildly ambitious and completely unmarketable. 20th Century Fox had no idea how to sell this bizarre spectacle to mainstream audiences. The soundtrack bounced between Beach Boys parodies, glam rock anthems, and gothic horror, confusing anyone trying to explain what they had just watched. Phantom of the Paradise bombed catastrophically in most American markets, earning back almost nothing against its modest budget. However, something strange happened in Winnipeg, Canada, where the film became an inexplicable phenomenon, playing for an entire year to packed midnight audiences. Paris and Tokyo also embraced it, but everywhere else, theaters sat empty. Critics were divided, with some praising De Palma's audacious vision, while others dismissed it as incoherent nonsense. Decades later, filmmakers like Edgar Wright and Guillermo del Toro cited Phantom as a major influence. Daft Punk reportedly bonded over their love for the film as teenagers, possibly inspiring their robot personas. The movie earned Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations for the score, a rare bright spot in its commercial failure. Today, it is celebrated as a cult masterpiece that was simply too weird and ahead of its time. But in 1974, this wildly original vision left studios wondering what went wrong. Peter Bogdanovich seemed untouchable after the last picture show What's Up, Doc? And Paper Moon made him the golden boy of Hollywood. His relationship with actress Sybil Shepherd had become tabloid fodder, and he decided to showcase her talents in a prestigious Henry James adaptation. Daisy Miller told the story of an American girl navigating European high society in the 19th century, a delicate character study requiring subtlety and nuance. The casting proved disastrous from the start. Shepherd lacked the range to portray the complex heroine, delivering a performance critics savaged as shrill and one-dimensional. Direction felt stiff and overly reverent to the source material, draining any life from the proceedings. The pacing moved at a glacial crawl, testing even devoted costume drama fans to their limits. Nothing about the film worked, from the performances to the production design to the lifeless screenplay. Reviews were brutal. Critics who had championed earlier Bogdanovich work turned against him, questioning whether his previous successes were flukes. The box office reflected this hostility, with audiences staying far away from what looked like homework disguised as entertainment. Paramount watched millions evaporate as the film played to empty theaters before being pulled from release. This failure marked a turning point in the director's career trajectory. The golden touch had vanished, replaced by mounting evidence that personal obsessions were clouding professional judgment. A downward spiral had begun, and Daisy Miller would be remembered not for its artistic ambitions, but as the beginning of a spectacular fall from grace. Hollywood loves nothing more than building someone up before tearing them down. Sean Connery had just escaped the James Bond franchise and was eager to prove his range with challenging material. John Boorman pitched him a science fiction epic set in a post-apocalyptic 2293, where immortal elites rule over savage brutals kept under control by a flying stonehead called Zardoz. The concept sounded ambitiously weird, and Connery agreed to star in what would become one of cinema's most baffling spectacles. Nothing could prepare audiences for the sight of Connery running around in a red loincloth and thigh-high boots, looking simultaneously ridiculous and deadly serious. The opening featured the floating stonehead spewing weapons while intoning ominous proclamations about order and control. Things only got stranger from there, as Boorman piled on dense philosophical concepts about immortality, social structures, and human nature, while the protagonist infiltrates the immortal society. Critics did not know whether to laugh or walk out. Pretentious dialogue and convoluted mythology overwhelmed any coherent storytelling. Audiences who came expecting usual charisma found themselves watching experimental science fiction that resembled an art student's fever dream. The striking visuals could not compensate for the impenetrable narrative and overwrought symbolism. Zardoz bombed hard at the box office, yet its sheer bizarreness ensured it would not be forgotten. The image of Connery in that infamous outfit became shorthand for 1970s excess and misguided ambition. Decades later, the film developed defenders who appreciated its gonzo commitment to strange ideas, but mainstream audiences fled from this mess. Boorman had swung for the fences and missed spectacularly, creating something too odd to ignore, but too flawed to embrace. Peter Bogdanovich's descent continued with this catastrophic musical that became one of the decade's most notorious disasters. Coming right after Daisy Miller's failure, he doubled down on showcasing Sybil Shepherd by casting her in a Cole Porter musical alongside Burt Reynolds. The director believed he could recreate the magic of 1930s Hollywood musicals, filming musical numbers live without dubbing or post-production safety nets. This decision proved fatal. Neither Shepherd nor Reynolds could sing or dance at the level required for a full-blown musical. Their performances felt amateurish and embarrassing, destroying any illusion of glamour the lavish production design tried to create. The live recording meant every flat note and missed step was permanently captured on film. Critics sharpened their knives, delivering reviews so savage they became entertainment in themselves. Audiences who ventured into theaters walked out in droves, spreading toxic word of mouth that ended any chance of the film finding its audience. The box office returns were catastrophic, earning back only a fraction of the substantial budget. This back-to-back failure of Daisy Miller and At Long Last Love effectively ended Bogdanovich's reign as a major Hollywood player. His obsession with Shepherd had blinded him to reality, and the industry turned its back on someone who had once been untouchable. The wreckage of his career served as a warning about hubris and poor judgment. Lucille Ball was one of the most beloved television stars in American history, with I Love Lucy making her a household name for decades. Warner Brothers figured her massive TV following would translate to the big screen with this musical adaptation of the Broadway hit. They poured resources into recreating the show's lavish production numbers, confident that Ball's star power would guarantee success. The problem started immediately. Ball was nearly 60 and lacked the vocal power or dancing ability the role demanded. Her television comedy skills did not translate to musical theater, and watching her struggle through demanding song and dance numbers became painful. The direction felt stiff and stage-bound, never finding a cinematic language for the material. What worked on Broadway felt forced and artificial on film. Critics were surprisingly gentle given Ball's beloved status, but audiences rejected the film completely. The box office numbers were horrifying, making Mame one of the worst financial disasters in movie musical history. Warner Brothers lost millions on what seemed like a sure thing. Ball's transition from television icon to movie star had failed spectacularly, proving that fame in one medium guarantees nothing in another. The failure left a lasting stain on an otherwise legendary career. While Ball's television work remained untouchable, Mame became the punchline whenever anyone discussed miscalculated star vehicles. The studio learned an expensive lesson about assuming TV audiences would follow their favorites anywhere. Now, for the twist in our countdown, Earthquake was actually a commercial success, becoming one of 1974's highest-grossing films. So, what is it doing on this list? The answer lies in the enormous production costs and groundbreaking sense-around technology that nearly consumed all the profits. Universal Pictures bet huge on this disaster spectacular starring Charlton Heston, spending lavishly on special effects and the revolutionary audio system that made theaters shake during earthquake sequences. The sense-around gimmick required expensive theater modifications and special equipment rentals, cutting into revenue from every screening. Many theaters could not accommodate the technology, limiting the potential audience. The production itself had ballooned to massive proportions with elaborate sets built only to be destroyed and complex special effects that pushed 1970s technology to its limits. When accountants tallied the final numbers, Earthquake had made money but far less than expected, given its box office performance. The film rode the disaster movie wave that included The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno, giving audiences exactly the spectacle they craved. Critics dismissed it as mindless entertainment, but viewers did not care. They wanted to see Los Angeles crumble in spectacular fashion, and Earthquake delivered. The relatively poor profit margin compared to its massive gross made it a disappointment despite seeming successful. Universal had gambled on technology and spectacle, producing enormous returns, only to discover that bigger was not always more profitable. We end with the most famous film on our list, a movie everyone knows despite its status as a financial disappointment. Paramount Pictures spared no expense adapting F. Scott Fitzgerald's masterpiece, hiring Francis Ford Coppola, fresh off The Godfather, to write the screenplay. Robert Redford took the title role at the peak of his stardom, with Mia Farrow as Daisy Buchanan. The production design, costumes, and cinematography were exquisite, recreating the Jazz Age with meticulous attention to detail. Yet somehow, despite all this talent and money, the film felt lifeless. Jack Clayton's direction moved at a funeral pace, draining energy from every scene. Redford looked perfect as Gatsby, but brought little emotional depth to the role. Farrow's shrill, nervous performance made Daisy insufferable rather than enchanting. The famous parties looked beautiful, but lacked excitement. Everything was technically impressive while being dramatically inert. Critics were divided. Some praised the visual beauty and production values, while others lamented the lack of vitality. The film grossed over $26 million against its $7 million budget, which sounds successful until you factor in the massive marketing campaign and expectations. Paramount had positioned this as a major cultural event that would dominate the year. Instead, it underperformed relative to the hype and investment. The Great Gatsby's enduring fame comes entirely from the source material's continued popularity and its high-profile cast. People remember it exists, unlike most films on this list, but few remember it fondly. It became the textbook example of how faithful adaptation and beautiful production design cannot compensate for poor direction and miscasting. Paramount learned that even literary classics and movie stars could disappoint when the fundamental filmmaking failed.